Shalom, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight. For those who usually get my notes, I have not sent them out yet. I've been working since 8:30 this morning on them, and I still don't like them. But anyway, I have plenty to talk about, so let's kind of dig in. I want you first off to turn to Exodus chapter 9, which is the last week's Parsha. And I want you to look at that very first verse, if you will. As I pause for everybody to find that. Okay. So look at the verse. It says, Hashem said to Moses, come to Pharaoh and speak to him. So I said to the God of the Hebrews, send out my people that they may serve me. Come to Pharaoh. Up until this point, every time Moses has spoken directly to Pharaoh, Pharaoh has always been outdoors. This is the first time where he will actually be indoors in his chamber. And so as we're looking at this, we have this unusual expression, come to. Now, the expression was used earlier in the book of Genesis in chapter 6 or chapter 9, come into the ark. But this isn't an ark that he's coming into. He's coming into the chambers of Pharaoh. And in coming into the Pharaoh's chambers, it's not a pleasant place to come. Now, if you look at chapter 10, verse 1, you again find, he tells him, Hashem spoke to Moses, come to Pharaoh. But this time, notice what he says. I have made his heart and the heart of his servants stubborn, so that I can put these signs of mine in his midst. The first time he came, he was scared to death. And you see, that would not be a hard thing to do, because when you begin to go to, if you go back and remember Esther, when she went to see Ahasuerus, in that process of going in, she didn't just walk through the front door and was there in front of him, but she went through anterooms or smaller rooms leading to him. And each room was filled with idolatrous symbols, pagan ideas. As she walked through, she found herself begging God, feeling that she had been forsaken. Moses probably had similar feelings that first time he went in. But he went, he did as he was asked, and he thought it was done. He wouldn't have to go back again. And now here in chapter 10, he finds himself going back a second time. Again, going through all the anterooms, going into where he is at. And as he goes in, he now knows that God is intending to harden his heart, to make it so that he doesn't want to change his mind. Imagine going to a place where you know the answer will be no, and you know that the man who's going to give you that no is very, very high. And spiritually, on the evil side, he is greater than you are. And that's what the people believed happened. Moses, though as great as he was not equal to Pharaoh. Pharaoh was a Tananim. Pharaoh was a crocodile. Pharaoh was a serpent. Pharaoh was a Leviathan. Pharaoh was all things evil. And so as he goes in this second time, I can't imagine that he felt any better as he walked in front of him. But he went, he did as he was commanded. And now I want you to go to look at chapter 11, the very end of chapter 11, because by now Moses has lost his fear. Look at verse number 8 in chapter 11. Then all these servants of yours will come down to me and bow to me, saying, leave you and the entire people that follows you. And after that, I will leave. But notice what he says next. And he left Pharaoh's presence in a burning anger. I wanted to know what it meant to be in a burning anger. So I went to the Talmud because that's where it talks about it. And the question is, what does it mean? According to Rakish, or Rish Lakish, it means he slapped him. Now, can you imagine standing before the President of the United States, giving him a warning, and then slapping him as you leave? How much change has gone on in Moses? How much has he grown as a leader? That's one of the things that happens as we stay closer to God. We begin to grow stronger and more intense in our understanding. And even though we're not always on the same level as the other person, we still manage to grow and find ourselves falling or leaning upon him. Verse 9 says, and Hashem said to Moses, Pharaoh will not heed you, so that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. And so Moses and Aaron performed these wonders before Pharaoh, but Hashem strengthened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not send out the children of Israel. Now there was one more plague that was yet to happen. But before that plague, Israel gets its first mitzvah, its first commandment. And that's really what I want to talk to you about tonight. That first commandment, that first thing that they were now responsible for doing. If you look at it, it says, Hashem said to Moses and Aaron, in the land of Egypt, that's where they were at this point in time, this month shall be for you the beginning of months, and it shall be for you the first of the months. So we know that we are just entering into the month which is called Nisan. That's what's happening. This is that month. And we're just entering into it. And God is now telling Moses, the first thing that you're going to talk to the people about is that we are now making this the first month. Well, we know that the first month actually up until this time had been the month of Tishri. But again, it wasn't the month of Tishri that was important. It was the first day of Tishri. You see, Tishri begins with Rosh Hashanah. It begins with the celebration. What are they celebrating? They're celebrating the creation of man. Because you see, on Rosh Hashanah, on the very first day in which man was created, the Jewish people understand that to be Rosh Hashanah. Now, the earth, according to them, was created on Elul 25. The 25th day of Elul. So then the question comes, how on earth could a month start in the middle and be the first day? Which rose to a level of an argument. The arguments can be found in the book of the Talmud, in the book of Rosh Hashanah, and it starts in chapter 10, B. I want to read a little bit. From this inference, both of them, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar, hold that the world was created in Nisan, and that the years are counted from that month as it was becoming the first month. You see, there was a real discussion, a real argument between them and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi over when actually the calendar should have started. And really, that's what I want to talk about, is the calendar. Because the calendar actually is a very significant part of us. Whether we realize it or not, we really should pay attention to the Jewish calendar. And we probably do. Because you see, the Jewish calendar was built for spiritual understanding. God changed the months, and actually he didn't change the months. He just simply said, this will be your first month. This will be your first day. Two entirely different ideas. But both of them are significant. Both of them are important because they talk to us about God's plans. You see, the month of Nisan, in fact, my wife named her dog Nisan. Actually, we call her Nisi. which means miracle. And actually the month of Nisan means miracle of miracles. And why does it mean that? Because of what occurs at this month. The excitement of leaving. It's also known as the month of redemption. It's the month when Israel was allowed to leave the land, to exodus, to return home. The Jews are now waiting for Nisan again. Many of them believe that Nisan will come, and that will be when the Mashiach comes. Others believe, no, he'll come in Rosh Hashanah. He'll come on the first day. Again, back to the same argument. Man was born on the first day, therefore Messiah will come on the first day. No, he'll come in the first month. So back and forth they go. But the idea of it is the fact that we are now approaching, or in this case, the Bible is approaching the idea of time. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning. You see, not only did he create heaven and earth, but he also created time. Time shows up in our month now. One of the things that science is now working on is the understanding of how time and space work together. But not only that, they're also working on the idea of time, space, and consciousness. The understanding of us in relationship to time and space. All is going on in the background. It's being argued and debated. No answers have come forward because God has not given them the answer that they need in order to solve the riddle. But it'll happen. God will eventually give to us as he's given everything else to us. Now, when we look at a calendar, we have to understand that the first Jewish calendar had no names, only numbers. You see, everything was called the first month, the second month, the third month, the fourth month, all the way through the 12th and 13th months. And the first day was the first day, the second day was the second day, and the third day was the third day. And there was no Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. There was no Sunday. It was only numbers. God only gave us numbers to start with. But again, numbers are important. Oh, by the way, when we're looking at the phrase in chapter 11, and we're looking at the last phrase, and he left Pharaoh's presence in a burning anger, the value of that phrase is 913. Doesn't mean much to you, except 913 is the word Bereshit. God put into his mind a hint of a beginning. Now remember, we said that this book was going to be called the second beginning, the second creation, Shishi. The first creation was Genesis, but this was the second creation. This was the creation of a nation. And in the creation of a nation, we begin to see time. We begin to understand that it's very different than what we've normally used to. Now, the Egyptians had a calendar. Abraham had a calendar. Well, actually, he didn't have a calendar. He lived in Ur of Chaldees. The Chaldeans had a calendar. The calendar was based on the moon. Well, the Hebrew calendar is kind of based on the moon too. Abraham understood that there was a period in time in which everything functioned, as they said. But you see, that was only in a lunar calendar, it's only 354 days. And so over the course of time, the Chaldeans lost track of time, just like the Muslims do today. Ramadan, one of the biggest festivals. What month is it in? It's in all the months, because you see their calendar is only 354 days. So they lose time. And so they're constantly chasing Ramadan from month to month. Eventually, it can be in the spring, or it can be the summer, or it could be in the fall, or it could be in the winter. That's Ramadan. Well, the Egyptians also had a calendar. So when we got down there, when the Jews got to Egypt, they had a calendar that they worked with. It was a calendar also based on the moon. Again, it was also based on something else. It was based on seasons. Seasons. Do you remember Genesis chapter 1, 14 and 15? God created the sun, the moon, and the stars for what purpose? Signs and festivals. Wait a second, there are no festivals in Genesis 1. But you see, God had already started planning for this Jewish calendar. He had already started thinking about what it's going to be like. And so he built this calendar so that they could keep track of the days. Now, in the course of time, and we don't have time, or I don't want to take time, but we can go into the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Numbers and find out that this first day that they're talking about had to be in the spring. So in other words, they had to fix it so that it would be there. And a 354-day date wouldn't work. So the Jews began to add to their calendar a 13th month in order to catch up. 7 times over 19 years, they will create what we call a leap month. Last year, we had Adar 1 and Adar 2, the leap month. This year, we do not have it. It is a regular 12-month calendar as we're looking at it. And it'll be another 12-month calendar next year, and then it goes to another leap year or leap month. So the Jewish people have built into their system a calendar that will work and cover all the seasons and allow the festivals to remain in their particular seasons. Now, one of the other things that happens is we have to identify a day. Well, the Jews understand that a day begins in the evening and goes to the day. The Egyptians said that the day began when the sun was just peeking over the horizon and the star Sirius, the dog star, was just descending on the horizon. That would be it. Well, again, you and I know that every morning we get up is not the same time every day for the sun to come up. The sun moves through the sky. And so when we look at the time and the season, we find out that right now we are finding our season is growing, moving towards spring, moving towards summer. In the Egyptian calendar, it just always managed to stay at the same place. So what happened to the day? The day became confused. They also found themselves dealing with another problem. Their problem was the fact that their calendar was, missing something. You see, they only had 3 seasons. Of course, it's easy to understand why they had 3 seasons. They never had any rain. So there was no such thing as a rainy season. So they created 3 seasons, 4 months each. And in those 4 months, they understood that their first season actually began in September. And that was the season that was called inundation. Now, inundation meant that the fact that upriver, up the Nile in Central Africa, the rains came, filled the Nile River, and the Nile River flowed down and inundated the land. It was a season for floods. Now, this season lasted somewhere between September and January. And I use the word somewhere between, because rain can't be counted on to come directly down continuously on schedule. And so the seasons also changed for them. Now, the second season was called emergence. And emergence simply meant winter. This was their planting season. All the floods had come. The ground was now ready. They planted the ground and they began to grow their crops, beginning for harvest. And then they had what was called low water season. And that's when the harvest was completed. But that happened in May to September. But again, it's a period of time. So their calendar was built in such a way to deal with that. So they had 4 months, 30-day months, or 360 days. They still don't have 365. So they just simply, Pharaoh decided that we will add 5 days to our calendar. And that's how it worked out. Now, in Hebrew, when we go through this, the first of the months is called Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh. Month is Kodesh. Rosh is head. But it didn't need to be there because the word Kodesh also has a familiar word. The word for new is Kaddish. Same letters, different vowels. But what's really amazing was the fact that Rabbi Ginsburg, when he was looking at this, found out that it was the 1820th sentence in the Bible. Now, I don't think I'm going to ever spend my time counting the number of sentences in the Bible, but he did. 1820. 1820, again, is back to math. Hebrew, the first scholars in Hebrew studied the letters, but the letters are valued with numbers. And so when they read scriptures, they had a mathematical mind. They saw things in there that were mathematical. They could make comparisons between two mathematical phrases. That is where they grew. Well, 1820 can be figured out to be 70 times 26. 70 in Hebrew is the word sod. Sod is the word for secret. Now, 26 is the value of God's name, Yod-Keh Vav-Keh. So in our particular story that we're looking at then, what we have then is a combination of a secret about God. In the book of Psalms, David, who got to be very familiar with the calendar because David, remember, wasn't supposed to live but hours. If it hadn't been for Adam giving him 70 years, his life would have been over in an instant. And so when you read Psalms 25, it begins by saying, the sod, the secret of God, the Yud-Keh Vav-Keh, is for those who are in awe of him. The secret is for those who are in awe of him. Is anybody eliminated from that phrase? Could we not all be awed by God? Should we not all be awed by God? So the Jewish calendar then is built upon secrets established by God, festivals that hadn't even been identified and organized yet. The first festival was going to be the festival that we call Pesach. Pesach speaks of the mouth, pay. It also speaks of falling over or jumping over. So the first festival jumps over. And it just by happenstance happens to be the time in which the barley harvest is made. So the first of the 3 major harvest seasons in Israel happens to coincide with that. Do you remember going back to 115 and 114, 115 seasons, festivals? God had already built into the system the seasons and the festivals. Now, as you go through it, you count 50 days from Passover, and where do you end up? You end up at Sukkot. Sukkot is that festival that celebrates the giving of the Torah. But it also is the second season in Israel. It's the season of the wheat harvest. You continue through a hot summer, and you reach the fall, and you reach Tishri 1. Well, actually, you need to go all the way to Tishri 15 because that's the other festival for harvest. That's the grape harvest. That's the harvesting of the fruit. That's the end season in a Jewish calendar. So God built into this system, into his calendars, something quite amazing. Things that we should probably think about. Now, there's a whole lot more that I could read to you, but actually, I want you just to think about the calendar and to take time to explore it in your own house, in your own way of looking at things. Do you understand the Jewish calendar is far superior to the English one? Oh yeah, we got Monday through Friday, just like they do. But how they look at Shabbat, the day of rest, how they look at all the festivals, how they all fit and intertwine into God's plan. The idea of the festival of Purim, which was not an original festival, but according to the Talmud, in the end, 2 festivals will be celebrated, and Purim is one of them. Imagine that. Okay, half hour, I'm through. I'm finished early tonight. Anybody have anything you want to talk about? Anything they want to comment on? If you do, it'll probably strike something that caused me to think about something else. As Ross sits there and smiles at me. I'm going to take my headset off and allow my wife to listen to you people talk to me. Please say nice things when she's listening. It's